Welcome to the Fantasy Football Clown Show. I'm your host, Ed Smith. Today we're going to take a look at the Paramount IDP League. And wow, this league is one of my favorites, and for lots and lots of reasons. And I guess this video might get a little bit lengthy because, man, what a whirlwind. So, this league drafted the summer of 2020. This league, I paid into it, didn't realize it was IDP, and then said, well, I guess I'm going to learn IDP. I had no idea that this thing would be IDP. I knew what IDP stand for, but I almost had to Google it and look it up. That's how clueless I was to it. So I started to get in and look at the research and realized, you know what? I don't have enough time before this thing drafts to figure out IDP, and so I'm just not going to draft defensive players, and I'm going to see what happens if I don't draft defense and just pick them up on the waiver wire. It was sometime in June of 2020, so I felt like I had enough time, and the people running it were, it felt like they were kind of serious about IDP, and so I couldn't gauge what they were, but they seemed very, very, very emotional, and they seemed like they were all kind of in my shoes of like recovering from COVID and not knowing, what was happening in the world, and so this was kind of out, and I thought, it seems very emotional, and this is the league where the whole fantasy habit started, really, and another piece of background on it is that this is where I learned I was very abrasive and very standoffish, and this league, the chat got really personal, and we were really attacking each other and just nasty comments, and the league has turned over, really. So the good news is, maybe I lasted, I guess. So if its lasting power is what wins the day, I guess I lasted. But it's turned over a lot, and people, when they didn't get their way, just left, and just kind of a crazy place. So give the people in this league a lot of credit that stuck with it from the beginning and put up with me, because I was just as bad as some of those other people the way I conducted myself. So there's a little bit of my roots of being a Philly guy, coming out, and I wasn't very kind to other people either. So I don't want to make it sound like it was. But I was told comments like this in this league: my team would never win. 10 years from now, it wasn't even going to be a chance because I messed it up so bad. And so fast forward into the second year, I was in the championship game. So now year one, granted, I didn't know what I was doing, and I lost. The belief, though, of this format is really shaped the blueprint of every single league for me. However, and so we're going to take a real deep dive on it. Very basic scoring. So just kind of one of those things is very basic scoring. 1 point PPR, 1.5 point PPR for the tight end. So nothing exotic in that respect. As far as starting positions, there are 19 starters over the IDP, with the IDP included. So 1 quarterback, 1 superflex, 2 running back, 2 receiver, 1 tight end, 2 flex, 3 defensive linemen, 3 linebackers, 3 defensive back, 1 IDP flex equals 19. 30 bench spots, 8 taxi, and 10 IR spots. Now, I'm going to quickly run through the defense, because with that idea that the defense, I still believe, and I'm kind of solidified on this, that defensive players change year to year to year, almost like middle relievers in baseball. Obviously the standout guys are pretty good, but I've had guys that I never heard of before, and they are top 10 linebackers in the league, and then one year, and then the next year they're not even on the team. Like, they go. I had a linebacker that was, I think, a top 3 linebacker for Minnesota in 2020. He moved on to Philly in a whole totally different scheme, and the guy was like cuttable. Like, he was terrible. So I really don't know who's good. I still, after 2 years, I can't figure out who's good at the linebackers. And the name game doesn't even make any sense, because you'll draft a guy like Diggs from Dallas as a cornerback, and he looks like he's awesome in real life, but in scoring he's just okay. I have him on the team, and I'm like, he's okay, but he doesn't win me any championships. And where you have to draft him, the capital you put forth, I'd rather just trade him away for a first round rookie pick and take Kyle Pitts or something. Like, I just think that I don't have a whole lot of love for defense, and maybe it's because I'm just not good at it. I still have yet to win a defensive league. I did get myself into the final four, and I think four of my 11 IDP leagues. So I'm getting better at them. Some of them were first year things though. So I always say in the first year I really have clueless on how they score, how they work. I am heading into year three though in some of these IDP leagues. So now I expect to win just like everything else. I expect to put them in a spot where they win. Now, two of the leagues were franchise leagues where I took the Falcons franchise and the Jaguars franchise, so I probably don't need to say too much more about those. So we've already outlined those teams, so those IDPs, and then another 32 team IDP that I just started this year. So I mean, I feel like those are kind of subtracted off of there. So four of eight I really made the playoffs in of things that I drafted and really cultivated, if you will. So pretty good, or made the final four. So feel pretty good about some of that, in those IDP leagues. But back to this league. So defensive lineman, Lorenzo Carter from the Giants, Sealer, I don't even know which team he plays on. That's how crazy it is. Jones from Denver, Wanham, Williams, and Kitty Pay. The linebackers, Alshire and Miles Jack. Miles Jack's the guy that I drafted. We'll get into that. I actually drafted him semi early in this league, and then I mean he's not that good either. So it's just kind of funny that in scoring he's okay, but he's just not excellent. Not even where I put the draft capital into him. Defensive back, Jordan Whitehead, Williams, Thomas, Harrison, Jones, Marcus May, and Joe Horn was a rookie. So there's I take players when I think I can get them or they're free or whatever the case is, but I sure don't trade up. I guess Byron Jones would be another example of that. Like he's a star in real life, but in fantasy he wasn't that good. I mean, the best two players here I think were Marcus May and Jordan Whitehead. So I don't think they're very good for their respective teams, but they sure score well in this kind of a format. So that's where we are there. So I did concentrate on the offensive side of the ball here when we drafted, and I'm going to go through the team, and then we're going to look at the draft and how it is. This is the team and the league that the quarterback frenzy began because of how these players around me reacted to my drafting, and I wasn't even ridiculous, but it became ridiculous because of I didn't have any idea who to pick and then the theory behind it. So we'll look at the quarterbacks. Have Pat Mahomes, Wentz, Baker Mayfield, Tua, Taylor Heineke, Kyle Allen, Tyrod Taylor, and Ryan Fitzpatrick. And we don't even know if Fitzpatrick's going to play or Tyrod's going to play, at this point. So that's there's four starters and really four guys that we don't even have a clue if they're even going to play football. So 8 quarterbacks. And that's an important number and distinction to have. Then we look at running backs. And this is Fournette, Connor, Michael Carter, James White, Johnson, that's Duke Johnson, Cohen, Gainwell, Reynolds, Foreman, Jarrett Patterson, Sermon, Herbert, Funk, Sargent. You guys that know me know that those guys at the end there, I have them on every team. I'll just dart throws that I got for free. The receiver room is Pittman, Renfro, Williams, which is Mike Williams, Agnew, Rager, Robbie Anderson, McKill Hardman, Little Jordan Humphrey, Slayton, Tyler Johnson, Devonta Smith, Josh Palmer, and Dez Fitzpatrick. The tight ends, Andrews, Pitts, Knox, Bryant, and Jacob Harris. And remember, we only start one tight end and only 1.5 PPR for the tight end, so only a half-point premium for the tight end. So not a lot of incentive to start the tight ends in the flex spots, and yet I feel like there's two flex spots, and I've got 3 reasonable tight ends in Andrews, Pitts, and Knox, so might even look to move some of that. That just kind of happened because you take who's coming to you, and so that's kind of where it is. This year in the draft, we have pick 4, pick 11, and then in the first round, and then in the second round, pick 14, pick 23. So of the top 25, we still do hold 4 picks, and then we have 28, 35 in the third round, and 47 and 59. And so, finished in that 11 spot or in second here in this league. So actually did get to the championship game and get to lost there, but got this team the whole way to the championship game. Which if I ever win the title, in year 3, for instance, that would be just amazing with a team that shouldn't win. But important to kind of look. These guys told me this team couldn't win, and my theory was this: any team that has Pat Mahomes on it has a chance when you start adding in other pieces around it. It just has a chance. Now, I will say this: that this league, I made my worst trade ever. It's not as bad as it once was. I made a trade that made everybody's eyes drop, and I'm not so sure it's a good trade yet. When we start to look at it, we're still waiting to see it. And so I made the worst trade I've ever made. I've made a trade that everybody thought I got way too much for, and I'm not even sure it was good enough. And so let's just kind of put that. Now we're going to look at the philosophy of who I picked and why and where. So in the first round of this team, as you noticed with Pat Mahomes on it, I obviously picked him in the first round, but I took him at 104. So somebody decided to take McCaffrey number 1. I guess I've seen that before, but in a super flex format, they took Zeke Elliott number 2, Lamar Jackson number 3. So this is the classic situation of letting value drop to me at 1-4, in my opinion. I get Pat Mahomes at 1-4. And then just look at the rest of the first round: Barkley, Thomas, DeAndre Hopkins, Kamara, Kyler Murray, CEH, Mixon, Adams. That's the top 12. And it took till pick 13 or 2-1 to get Jonathan Taylor off the board. Now that would have been the second rookie that year. That they took. And I was at this point, I'm just taking the best players. I'm going there because at 2-9 I took Tyreek Hill. And so now I have a quarterback and a receiver. And again, I'm just basically drafting off the sleeper rankings. I'm pretty stupid at this point. I'm just drafting there. And then I start to see quarterbacks go, and I take Wentz at 3-4. Now back in 2020, Wentz was with Philly. It seemed like it was a reasonable pick, and I took him 2, 4, 6. He was a 7th quarterback off the board. I mean, it's not as good as when you see Josh Allen go off the board after. Obviously there's some things there. So I come back and I take Joe Burrow with 4-9. Figured he's at least a good rookie quarterback. When I've seen Jonathan Taylor go a couple rounds earlier and Clyde Edwards-Helaire go a couple rounds earlier. So I get him. He's my 3rd quarterback, and now I'm starting to say, okay, this would make some sense. Somebody's going to be quarterback short, here in this little startup. So I took Mark Andrews as the 2. He was actually a 3rd tight end off the board at that time. So I have a lot into Andrews, if you think about it. But that was before he had the clunker in 2020, and then before the good year this year. Then I took Tua with 6-9 because I'm figuring, geez, these rookies are flying off the board. I may as well. Like I saw Jerry Jeudy go first, and CeeDee Lamb already went, so I'm like, well, I'm going to take Tua. I'm taking another quarterback. And then I had gotten nervous somewhere along the line that I had no running back, so I took James Conner 5-7, and I traded away, some picks in the middle. And then when we came back at the 9-4, which is where my next pick was, I took Rager, which was a bad pick, and Henry Ruggs, which is a bad pick. So now I'm just hitting these receivers hard, figuring that I'm going to take all the PPR running backs. Was my plan. And, so I thought I'll just take these third down guys. I'll go 0 RB. I have Connor to stabilize things, which, if you notice, that everybody thinks, oh, you have no running backs. But all the running backs were gone. I was just taking quarterbacks. So I took Rager, Ruggs, Pittman, Williams, and Slayton kind of in order there. And I also got Derek Carr in there. So now I'm sitting with 6 starting quarterbacks. And then I have a bunch of receivers, and then I just followed in behind that and took Tyreek Cohen, James White, Boston Scott, and Jerick McKinnon. Like I have 4 of these guys. I'm like, okay, 2 of them have to start, 2 of them have to pan out, 2 of them have to be something they have to fill one spot because I'll use Connor in 1. That was my theory going in. And then we're getting to the 18th and 19th round, and I'm taking guys like Ryan Fitzpatrick and Tyrod Taylor who were going to start that year, and I'm like, okay, now I have 8 starting quarterbacks. So I was just kind of counting starting quarterbacks at that point, and I'm saying I have 8, and these guys haven't figured it out. Now they're all taking all these defensive players, and at pick 20th round, I took Dawson Knox. He's my 2nd tight end, and I'm like, okay, things are looking good. And then I thought I have no defensive players, and they're really getting on me on the board. And so I took Myles Jack at the 21st round, and I honestly look back, and I'm like, I don't know if my team was any better having Myles Jack on it, right? I have 8 starting quarterbacks, and I think they were going to bring more return on investment than Miles Jack ever would. And then I followed him behind and got Robbie Anderson, Corey Davis, and then now we're down at the 24th round, and I decide, you know what? I don't know who the heck to take at this point. People are taking guys like Willie Gay and P. Ryan and Armstead and Edelman and Duvernay, and I decide I'm going to just hammer the backup quarterback room or quarterback rooms and just have like, I didn't know what I was doing. I just figured that quarterbacks would have the chance of bringing first round draft capital in a trade. That was my theory. Like if a starter gets hurt, I figured people handcuff their running backs, and that's who they're taking. Mike Boone, Edo Smith type people. I'm like, I'm going to handcuff quarterbacks that can bring me draft pieces back to get the players when I figure out who's good. So I take Taysom Hill, Robert Griffin III, James Fromm, Jake Luton. And before you laugh too much, I want you to think about this. Taysom Hill, Robert Griffin III, Jake Fromm, and Jake Luton all started games in the NFL since 2020. They all were starting quarterbacks at some point in line. And so I'm not saying that I traded them all for rookie picks, but in round 24, 25, 26, and 27, 4 guys I took, all 4 of them started NFL games. And in a super flex league, if you have a choice of taking a 0 or starting a starting quarterback. Any of those guys, Robert Griffin actually had the least, and Jake Fromm, they probably scored the least, but they still scored nice starts. They were scoring 12 points, 14 points. There's real points there. And if you look at a guy like, let's see, Raquel Armstead, how good has he been? Lynn Bowden, how good has he been? Jay Sternberger, how good's he been? Is there ever been a time since 2020 that any of those guys could have brought anything back in trade value and could have been started any week? Like, there just was never that time. Now, I followed behind that and took Hunter Renfrow in round 28, add to that receiver room, more darts, right? And we know what he is. Tyler Johnson, more darts. If there's young guys that have a chance, I'm taking them, and we'll see what happens. And then I decided, okay, so this is all developing as I'm going here, this philosophy. But then I come back and I take Henne and Mullins, and my theory there was I took the backup quarterback for good programs, because I said if something happens to Pat Mahomes, I want the Kansas City quarterback. If something at that point happens to Jimmy G, Nick Mullins was the backup, and I'm like, you know what? That makes some sense. So I was basically then now looking at offenses that I wanted to have a quarterback in, and thought it's kind of like running backs, only running backs don't get all the carries when their starter goes out. The quarterback gets all the reps, and he's valuable. So now by this time, now remember, we're in round 30 and 31. Like, the guys that people are taking are Miles Boykin and Alan Lazard and Alshon Jeffrey and Deshaun Jackson. I mean, like, that's what we're taking. And I took some of that, and then by round 34 I take Melvin Ingram, so that's defensive player number 2. So I have it. I wasn't putting a whole lot of emphasis on defense and didn't care. I figured, at this point I'm like, okay, I'm just going to take the defense the last bunch of picks, and I'll fill out. I'll have a starter at every spot just so that I don't. But I'm just going to hammer quarterbacks. So now, funny. And I've since dropped some of these guys because they don't mean anything to me. But I then at round 36 is when the team almost lost their shit on me, basically. Because then in round 36 to 42, I took Mason Rudolph, Jeff Driscoll, Chase Daniel, McCarron, Gabbert, McCoy, and more. And before we laugh though, so even there, Rudolph, Daniel, Gabbert, and McCoy have all played, and been since 2020, and so Driscoll sucks, and McCarron hasn't played, and he got hurt before last year, and Gabbert I guess really didn't play at all. He didn't get any points, and Moore didn't play. He was gone. But you're gonna at that point though. I mean, there's people taking guys like, some of them are taking guys like Josh Gordon. Dez Bryant is being drafted. I'm looking here. Andy Isabella, Philip Dorsett, How good are those kind of guys? I mean, there are some wins. Somebody got Travis Homer and Jacob Huntley. I don't know, Quaz Ellison. There's some Quandre Ellison, I should say. I mean, there's some guys that you can draft there, but as you notice, like I still think that those quarterbacks. If you had Colt McCoy, I could get a lot more for Colt McCoy than Travis Homer at any point. Even if you said, "Hey, I could start Travis Homer in a running back spot," um, so I feel like the it worked. And then it took me till round. I took Cameron Brate as another tight end, and then it took me till round 44, and then I just hit the defense hard. And I took guys. I'm looking through here. I don't even know if any of these defensive guys are still on my team. Like that's how bad. And then I followed in with Finley and Barkley, and then I finished up with Flacco and Easton Stick. I mean, at the 57th round, and so this went deep. And I guess what I realized is, and they just said I had too many quarterbacks. And I think at one time I had 26 quarterbacks on this team, and so kind of funny that I'm down to 8. Just after 2 years later. So in year 3, I'm down to 8. So I've kind of eliminated those quarterbacks. Now part of it was from trades, and I was moving guys like, I would trade guys as they came into be, like Flacco. I think I traded him for a second and 2/3, and turn that into something of value. Like if you can get Michael Carter for Flacco, that's a good deal. And so that's kind of what I did. Is I just kept twirling it around. Now the trades that I made that were ill advised, I I started to realize that Taysom Hill, he wasn't really what I was looking for, because I wanted backup quarterbacks. Now he became a backup quarterback, but I didn't want a guy that I didn't know if I could play or not play. So I was looking to move on for him, and I thought that I was trading him, but it was really Tyreek Hill, and because of the T Hill, and I wasn't used to the app, so that kind of went out. But my Tyreek Hill trade, when I traded him away, I traded Tyreek Hill and Corey Davis kind of a year too early before Davis broke out, and I got Micah Hardman back. Figured I would keep him up with Pat Mahomes, kind of stupid, and then I got Leonard Fournette, and at that time Leonard Fournette was a dud, so it was really stupid. But I thought, well, I would have Leonard Fournette and James Conner as my 2 running backs. Now that hasn't turned out horrible, honestly, that's turned out better than it could have. But Tyreek Hill was worth way more than that, so I guess I feel like that's one of the snafus there. And then the trade that I think everybody thought I got made out a lot with was when I traded Joe Burrow for 3 firsts and 3 seconds and 3 thirds. But if we fast forward, the first that I got for Joe Burrow is Devonta Smith, and not that that's bad, but Devonta Smith in a 2 wide receiver league, 12-team league, we only start 24. Like, the first piece of that doesn't feel that good. Now this year, that team, as a lot of times, didn't do as well, even though Joe Burrow did well. This year, that team didn't do well, so it's the number 4 pick in the draft, and so we started adding number 4 to Devonta Smith and some of the other people that I was able to accomplish in there. I was looking last year, so I got, in that trade, I got Devonta Smith, Gainwell, Kitty Pay, and Khalil Herbert in that so far for Joe Burrow. So, not anything that really feels like it moves the needle a whole lot. I mean, it's just sure dart throws, but my dart throw of Kenny Gainwell doesn't feel that good, and Kitty Pay doesn't feel that good. But the trade off of getting Flacco and getting Michael Carter back, that was a real trade. Like, I got him so far in there, and you get to wait on who comes next out of that trade. And then I made a trade where I eventually got was able to trade back out of the field spot and got Kyle Pitts, and then some future draft capital coming up in the future. So that's a thing that I'll do sometimes, is move down a couple spots and kind of out of that quarterback spot. So what I did with all those big quarterback pools in that year 1 is I created last year's draft to be Lawrence, Fields, Lance. So when I picked 4, I actually took Pitts, and then number 5 was Wilson. So, and then we had Harris, Etienne, and then Mac Jones went. So what I basically did was create this frenzy of people feeling like they don't have quarterbacks, and so they had to just draft them all ahead of everybody else. Now, I took Devonta Smith over Waddle, but the 2 Chase and Williams went pick 9 and pick 10. So I was just one spot out of getting like a guy like Williams, which would have made that trade for Burrow be awesome. So, sometimes it's just a little bit, but I'd like to think that because I drafted so many quarterbacks, I've affected the rookie draft, a great deal. And so there are still teams that just are short on quarterbacks just based on my horde in the startup draft. So what that does is it kind of creates this false sense of pushing a position that I have of strength and pushing the value of my assets up. So that's why I think this team really, this whole league actually taught me that. Now, I since became the commissioner last year, and I've actually turned it over to somebody else this year. So, no longer the commissioner. But what's kind of cool about this is watching the league develop and move year over year, and so where it is. So excited for this year. I mean, I'd like to run it back and get to the championship game. I do think winning's elusive, and so. But I also think that my team is pretty good on paper, anyway, and things can change. And it's a little bit wide receiver heavy, honestly. I this is kind of one of those rare teams where I don't really know who to start. I've got a whole lot of mediocre guys that can perform on a given week, but no, I like to turn a bunch of the pieces into top pieces, and the scared part of doing some of that is then when injuries happen, you don't have the depth to navigate the waters, and I think that's what's really made this team really well is it's got a lot of depth pieces. So yeah, on day one, you don't know who to start at receiver when you have Renfro and Pittman and Williams and Robbie and all those guys and Devonta Smith, for two spots. But once some of them, get cold and go away, then it's nice to have. And or if they get like excruciatingly hot, then you can also move on from them and get some future picks, which kind of keep the cupboard full as well. And so like Andrews gets hot, he brings back some value in this league. So and I feel good about having Pitts as my tight end. So probably look to move him for future draft capital. Once we get to the draft and get through that in the summer and people want to start trading, I'll probably look to move on from Andrews and try to really get some ridiculous draft capital out of him for next year so that I can capitalize on him. But now I don't want to lose him and then have him beat me in the championship. That's always another big fear of a team like this. So let me know what you think of the team and where you think the team's gone, and if you think that, hey, those guys were right that told me that everything from how terrible my mom was because I drafted all these quarterbacks. Let me know if you think the quarterback blueprint works and how you think it played out. If you think I'm onto something with how it played out, so hit that like button, comment in the comment sections, hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. I'm sure you have if you're here listening to this ramble, and hit the notification bell as well so that you know when the new content is uploaded. And for now, I'll see you next time on the Fantasy Football Clown Show. I'm your host, Ed Smith.